G'day guys, welcome back to Off-Road Crusader. Welcome back to another episode. This one's all about the rooftop tent. It's about all the modifications, upgrades, changes that I've done to it over the years as a response to finding shortfalls or issues with it or anything like that. This is in a bit of a response to a comment I got a little while ago saying maybe I should talk about that sort of thing. So here it is. I do listen to your feedback and we're going to jump straight into it by looking at a bunch of things which I've changed, upgraded, replaced, improved with a rooftop tent setup. These will obviously be specific to my rooftop tent, but you'll find that a whole heap of them are going to apply to your setup as well. So let's jump into it. The first big issue that you have with the rooftop tent is because it's attached to the top of the car needs to be level for the rooftop tent to be level. You are never going to forget the first night you spend umming and ahhing if you should move the car when your feet are higher than your head, or you keep rolling into one wall of the rooftop tent because your car isn't level where you parked. The best way to do this obviously is to level the car, and the best thing I've found is to get one of these. This is a cross-check level, spirit level thingy, little T-piece. Obviously measures how level something is front to back, left to right. I basically put this one on a nice little flat spot on the center console that I know is flat because I've checked it on a flat surface and found where this is going to sit perfect. And that way wherever I park up I can just sort of put that on this specific spot, eyeball, yep, this is about right, and then go from there. Obviously you'll have a pretty good idea of what is level based on you just sitting here, but obviously everything can sort of throw that out, so having something sort of tangible can really help with that as well. So definitely get yourself something like that, about $4 or $5 from a camping store, and it will definitely help you out. The other two things I would mention are super handy to have with you is a shovel, and B, a set of Maxtrax or recovery boards. Those recovery boards you can obviously use to help raise the vehicle. You can put them under, say, the left hand side or the rear or the front of the car to help bring it up that tiny amount. You can stack them so that obviously one corner can sit a little bit higher, and you can do exactly the same thing with the shovel as well, actually digging one side of the car down, so when you drive forward that side falls into a tiny little pothole and it levels the car out a bit as well. So grabbing those two and you'll be able to level the car out wherever you park. The second thing is how you're going to mount your rooftop tent. How's it going to sit on top of your car? Now there's a number of ways you can obviously do it. The best way that I could advise to anyone is keep the rooftop tent as low and as wide as possible as you can on the car. Best way I've found is to find a backbone mounting system that is compatible with your vehicle. For me, I'm using the ARB base rack mounting rails that are for the 200 series, the full length ones, and I'm also using 3 alu-cab crossbars as well. That way I've found it will keep the rooftop tent as low as it possibly can be. The next thing you can sort of look at is even putting like a platform roof rack or something on there. I would err against that just because the platform itself is usually quite substantially heavy. You know, you're talking anywhere between 10 and 25 kilos depending on the size that you need. And it's just not necessary. It's just not necessary for a full, like that's your full platform, you know, you don't have to support the whole thing. For the alu-cab specifically, it has a lot of like structural ridges running north-south underneath the tent, which give it a lot of stability sort of front to back, but in terms of left to right, it is a little bit lacking. It will sag a little bit as the weight is applied, so you need some sort of crossbars underneath to support that. There's another tent, I forget which one exactly it was, which does the opposite. It has a whole bunch of structural members underneath running east-west, but nothing running north-south, so obviously it will sag that way. So just be mindful of how the structure of your tent is obviously achieved, and definitely go about supporting that as best you can. The less that the tent moves, the better it'll be on the road, because obviously it's not shifting around, it's not making a lot of noise sort of banging and clattering around, and it will also reduce the amount of stress fractures you may get in the metal or the actual material of the rooftop tent that it's made from all that vibration as well. If you've got an older style rooftop tent, and by older I really mean like the soft folding ones, the ones that are like a square and they sort of fold out on one side of the car, I would probably recommend to move that forward on the car, or at least as center of the wheelbase as you possibly can. On the previous Prado that I had one of those rooftop tents and I had it mounted as far back as I could get it. As a result of that, that was I think about 45 or 50 kilos that tent was. You noticed it, especially trying to go up a hill, that extra 50 kilos on the back, up high, it caused a cantilever effect, and it made me, when I was going up a rutty hill, it was more than likely to lift the front wheels and cause me to lose traction, all that sort of stuff. Whereas if I'd moved it more centrally over the car, the weight is more central on the car, and it won't have any of that sort of effect. With the alu-cab on top of the car, even on the old Prado, it handles so much nicer because the weight is spread between the front and rear axle much nicer. And as such, on the road, it just feels nicer. So when you're going around corners, it doesn't feel like it's going to roll off onto one side. And fuel economy wise, it also helps as well because it's not got this massive big drop-off effect at the end of the car. Now, the other big downside that I've heard about rooftop tents is obviously you lose your roof space, because obviously a tent is now up here. You haven't got a roof rack as such, you can just throw stuff on. There are small ways you can overcome this, obviously by making the roof of your rooftop tent more versatile and giving it more function as well. For me, I run a semi-flexible solar panel on the roof here. This is a King's 160 watt. I'm running that on top of some core flute, which is like a plastic tubing sort of panel, which sits between the panel and the roof of the tent. Previously, I had a solar panel very similar to this one on it, and it died after 12 months, which it was a cheap panel. I shouldn't expect too much of it. But I believe the reason it died was because I didn't allow for the airflow to run underneath, which is what the core flute is for. I've mounted that using Gorilla permanent double-sided tape, which is really, really strong, and it's set on there really, really well. We've obviously done quite a few Ks on this car now, and it hasn't moved a beat, even with gale force winds and driving at high speeds and that sort of stuff. The other thing I've done, and most rooftop tents will have some sort of channel system on the roof, which will allow you to fit crossbars and then fit stuff on top. I personally wanted to keep everything as low as possible, so I made this little bracket here to hold my max tracks on the top. These obviously sit as far back as possible, that way if I need them, I can stand on the tailgate of the car and access the bolts that hold them on and take them off to use them. If I had it over the front here, it'd be a bit of a different story. You'd have to go left to right. These mounts are just some steel flat plate with obviously some bolts to go into there. Comes across, brings the stud up, and then I can just put here I've got these eyelets that I've screwed onto them. Otherwise, you can also make like possibly a bracket to go over the whole thing as well. But they're definitely a way you can use it. Other things I've seen people do are obviously putting the crossbars on top and then fitting a roof basket. So they're the basket style ones you might see on like a smaller SUV or even like a hatchback or something like that. They're usually just a small steel basket with a rim on them, and those you can also use for like, throwing stuff up here if you need to as well. There was also one example of someone who actually put a roof pod on these. So these you can buy from places like Rhino or Thule or something like that. They're like a full polycarbonate pod that you can obviously open and close, and they fitted that on top of a rooftop tent. They're a lightweight option, and as long as the gas struts which hold the roof open can allow for that extra weight to be on top, then you're golden. Otherwise, obviously, you've got to watch your weight limit. With the Alucab, this particular one, I think off the top of my head, was about 60 pounds or something like that you can put on the roof while still opening and closing the roof. So it gives you plenty of headway in terms of what you can put up here. I've had a Oztent RV5 up top here, strapped on top of the roof, and still was able to open and close the tent just fine. And yeah, really happy with it for that reason. But don't think that just because you've got a rooftop tent, you're going to lose the functionality of the roof of your four-wheel drive. Plenty of options there for things that you can use it for as well. Now this one may be a little bit more specific to my particular rooftop tent, but you'll find other tents out there that do the same thing. There is no side protection for getting in and out of the tent while it's raining or horrible weather. As soon as you open the canvas flap on the inside there, any amount of rain or wind or yucky weather can make its way inside. Not particularly ideal. Obviously, if you want to get in and out of the tent, then that's an issue. If you want to stay in there, then it's fine. But I wanted to create a solution for that. There is a solution you can buy from the manufacturer, Alucab, but for close to $500 plus freight, I was a little bit hesitant to do that without giving something a go myself. So I've made myself a little side awning. What it basically does is cover this side window. It prevents a lot of rain, or all the rain essentially, from getting in there. It's not a professional solution, I suppose you'd call it. This is about the third prototype I've made. Previous ones tried different ways of attaching it and using it, but this is probably the best thing I've found so far. I'll set it up, you can have a look. So this just unrolls from up the top here, rolls out this bottom eyelet, gets a little bungee cord down to a point on the back. That basically covers that side wall. It's connected up the top with some carabiners to some eyelets. This side's got a bit of a bungee cord because it needs to move slightly as I sort of roll it up or put it away. Got two spring poles. I've made some little holes here for them to be mounted in. So one goes in there, gets fed into the eyelet, and then into the channel. And that picks up on a eyelet that I've put into the actual tarp itself. And then I'll put that one in as well. Ta-da! And that's pretty much it. Quick and easy to set up, which was definitely a requirement for this sort of design. I didn't want something that would take 6 years to set up or be particularly fiddly or something like that. It's just a piece of tarp. I wanted to use that because I had it lying around at home. It's cheap, it's easy to work with, and if I did muck up and it took me 6 million tries to get it right, I haven't lost out on a lot of money on some expensive canvas or something like that. But when eventually I do turn it into something a little bit nicer, I'm going to get a canvas worker to make this into some nice canvas and put some proper eyelets in it and that sort of stuff. And then it's going to look really, really nice. But for now, it's just a prototype. But it keeps all the rain and wind and everything off of this particular window, which means even when it's raining and it's horrible, you can leave this window just about all the way down. Allows a lot of airflow into the tent, stops that condensation build up and that sort of thing. Plus allows you to get in and out of the tent while it's raining, which is definitely a massive bonus. So if your tent doesn't come with a side awning, consider making one. It's not that hard. It's basically a big diamond shape of tarp material, and then it's just have a bit of a think about how you're going to fix it onto the rooftop tent. But very happy with that idea. Welcome into the tent. A few things in here I wanted to show you. The first being probably the most game-changing mod that I've ever done, which is, it sounds a little funny to say, is this, which is an electric blanket. Having an electric blanket in here has been amazing. The one I'm using is a Kmart 240 volt electric blanket. It's a king single size. It was about 30 bucks I think I had to buy it for. And that's obviously 240 volts, so I need an inverter to run it. I'm using a 400 watt iTech World inverter, which is obviously mounted down in the car through an Anderson plug, and then I run an extension cord up here whenever I need it. The massive benefit of an electric blanket is you can obviously pre-warm your bed, make your bed nice and warm, so when you do go to get in there at the end of the day, the bed's already nice and warm. And I tell you what, it makes such a big difference. For not a huge outlay to sort of set this sort of thing up, it is 100% worth it. Now the reason I went for a 240 volt electric blanket versus a 12 volt one is this has a 12-hour timer on it. It also has a single controller. It looks better aesthetically, so it's much more ergonomic to use compared to the 12 volt versions that I'd found, which always seem to have a really cheap, flimsy feel to the controllers. It either was on or off, or it would have a little slider going from high to low, or it would only have a 45 or 60 minute timer on it, which is not ideal, because what I would like is, if it's a really cold night, put the electric blanket on low and leave it on all night. That way I stay nice and cozy. Nothing worse than waking up at 3 in the morning to find the electric blanket's been turned off and everything in your bed is freezing cold except for where you've been sleeping. So that's the main reason I went for it. Also, power consumption. It didn't really make that much of a difference which way I went once you converted, once you factored in inverter power and that sort of thing as well. With 12 volt, you tend to have a lot of voltage loss between obviously your power source and your load or your accessory that you're running it from. So your wires have to be fairly bulky to allow for that power to flow through and to not get that voltage drop over long distances. For me, that cable length would be probably between 3 and 5 meters, I'd say, the way that I'd run the cables through on this setup, which obviously means I'd probably need to double the size of the cable to run a 12 volt blanket. With a 240 volt setup, you don't get that voltage drop between your inverter and your accessory because it's 240 volt, it's AC, it's a different sort of, it's a bit beyond my level of explaining, but essentially you don't get voltage drop with AC on this sort of use. So that's definitely a good way to go. Power consumption wise, it's pretty much the same. On high, I think it's at around sort of 4 amps an hour it'll use. On low, it's down to about 1.5 amps that it will use. So, you know, it sort of gives you a bit of a ballpark figure to work with. So yeah, it's definitely an option if you want to be able to go camping in the cooler months with, say, a partner who doesn't really like camping in the cold. It'll definitely get them out camping a lot more than they used to. The next accessory I wanted to show you is lighting. This makes a massive difference when you're out camping, having obviously lights and being able to see what you're doing. Even if it's going to bed, it's nice to be able to have a light to set up and do what you need to do. For me, I'm running a hardcore, this is a 40 centimeter light bar, which obviously can go between orange and white. I've just got one of their basic dimmer switches up here as well, which obviously can change the color as well as do the intensity of the light as well. That's running basically down the side of my rooftop tent. I've tucked it into the Velcro, not through the Velcro, just sort of like wedged it in place. That then runs under the blanket, under the mattress, all the way down here to where I've got a 12 volt socket. I could just plug it in like a cigarette lighter. Definitely worth doing if you can have something hardwired in like I've done here. And if for whatever reason I need to remove it, I can. Some newer rooftop tents will come with lights already pre-fitted. If that's the case, all well and good. But if your rooftop tent doesn't come with it, don't think that you can't add something nice and easy. I've mounted this with the same Gorilla double-sided tape that I use for the solar panel. Hasn't moved yet. I don't expect it to. I'm really happy with it. Definitely something you could do at home as well in an afternoon. Woo! Now this is probably the mod that I'm most proud of and makes a big difference to us in the rooftop tent is a drop-down table. How cool is that? So this one here is just on a piano hinge. It's a bit of 7mm ply. I've got a bit of edging here to sort of neaten off the finish. Some strapping off of an old ratchet strap that I had sitting around at home, which has been riveted into the side of the rooftop tent structure with a big washer on there as well to help it purchase. That's connected with some screws underneath, bit of black carpet underneath, and a piano hinge on the back there as well to obviously add strength to it. This has been invaluable on our trip because obviously we have a place to put things. If you want to have a coffee or just even be able to put a water bottle up here without having to use these pockets, which are okay, but they're a little bit dicky to use. And obviously if you want to keep anything flat and level, they're not ideal. So this works perfect. Obviously it just sits up like that when you close the tent, falls down when you need it to. I think ideally, to sort of just really finish off that last 2%, I'd really like to have a latch that I could use to hold it up in place. Mainly if we ever wanted to sleep with our heads down this end of the tent, not that we really do anyway, but just to give that option. And at this stage, there's nothing really to hold it in place. I'd have to add like a full latch and everything else to make it work. So it's a little bit more intensive to obviously make that work, but it's still possible to do once you put your head to it. But yeah, look, I'd definitely add this to your rooftop tent if you haven't already. Now, as of this video going live, you will have seen that Alucab have brought out a new 3R rooftop tent, which is their brand newest model, which has this drop-down table. I did have this idea a long time ago, and it took me a while for it to come to fruition, and now they've come out with one which comes standard with their new rooftop tents. So sorry, Alucab, I didn't steal your idea. This is a pretty dicky model compared to what they're supplying as well. But I mean, for probably less than 50 bucks, you could make this yourself and add it onto any rooftop tent as well. Only thing that I'd probably note with constructing something like this is having to have the actual structural strength from these hinges. Behind here is a bit of sandwich panel, some insulation, and then you have the outer skin of the rooftop tent. That's it. There's nothing else to bolt it to. So what I had to do was basically drill all the way through the insulation, the inner lining, and also the outer skin, put a bolt through that to go all the way through to here, basically measure a bunch of times, bring it out, cut it to the exact length it needs to be, and then once I put this piano hinge on with a nut and a washer, obviously that you basically don't see the end of the bolt because that's the desired length that I need it. Drilling holes in a rooftop tent is not everyone's cup of tea. I completely understand that, but look, if you use some sealant and do everything you can in your power to make sure it's watertight, then you're all good to go. I've done the same thing and I haven't had any issues with water ingress so far. So there you have it, bunch of cool little tips, tricks, improvements you can do for your rooftop tent. I really love mine. I've had it for a little while now, and obviously everything you have over time you tend to make little improvements for, and just sort of adapt and make it better for your current use and what you're intending to use it for. I hope you found some benefit from this video. If you have, be sure to subscribe or hit that little like button as well. Leave me a comment if you've got any cool little improvements you've done that I haven't mentioned here. And if you really want to support the channel, check out the merch store in the link in the description below. You can get yourself a cool shirt like this one, or even a cool little sticker or patch to really show that your support for the channel. It goes a long way, helps me getting out making videos like this more often. Thanks guys, I'm going to go and make a campfire and get warm because I think the rain might be coming. We'll catch you next time on Off-Road Crusader. Cheers!